la séance.
Welcome. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 110 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
Format. We have a lot of people on virtually, so I want to remind you of some rules that we do when we have virtual meetings. So pursuant to standing orders, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is not take photographs of the meeting, please. The screenshots or photos are not permitted, but you can get it online later on and after the meeting. Now, public health authorities, for those of you who are not wearing masks, we are not mandated to wear them, but some of us should wear them in order not to get the flu and the new COVID virus. So there you go. So just to remind those of you on virtual and those of you in the room that we have powerful microphones, and if you have any devices sitting in front of them, they could give feedback and they could actually hurt the ears of the interpreters. So be careful about all of those things. Now, when you are speaking, please address your questions and your responses through the chair. And that's about it. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say. And today is our first meeting of the study of the National Forum on the Media. Thank you, Mr. Champoux, for this study. And we have on virtual Jen Gerson, April Lindgren, Professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, Jen Gerson, who's co-founder of The Line and independent journalist, Centre d'études sur les médias, Colette Brun, Professor, Department.
Centre d'études sur les médias, Colette Brun, a professor at Laval University.
Studies and Student Life from École supérieure en arts et technologies des médias du Cégep de Jonquière. Then we have the Canadian Media Guild with us here. That's Annick Forrest. And Ms. Gardner is the first one to speak. Now, you all have 5 minutes to present. And I will give you a 30-second shout, literally, a shout-out to tell you only have 30 seconds left. Remember, if you don't finish everything you want to say, you can elaborate on it when you get questions. So don't be worried if you finish your time in 5 minutes. Now, I will begin starting with Ms. Gardner. Your opening statements, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I want to check, just a quick audio check. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Thank you. Okay. My name is Sue Gardner. I am the former head of CBC.ca at the Canadian...
But your microphone is picking up your voice.
See, that's what I wondered. Yeah, you are not hearing me okay.
Because it wasn't.
Do I need to turn it on?
Yes, it's on. The light is on.
Okay, it's on now?
So just make sure you shift it a little bit so it gets in front of you.
Are you going to put your...
There we go. That's better.
Bring it out. Just bring it out. Yeah. Okay. Is that better?
That's better. Yes.
Okay, terrific. All right. Okay. No, we were too close. Okay. My name is Sue Gardner. I am the former head of CBC.ca, the English language website of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I am also the former head of the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the San Francisco-based 501c3 nonprofit that operates Wikipedia. And I have been dabbling recently, sort of, in public policy, including a recent stint as the McConnell Professor of Practice at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. Further contextualizing myself, I started my career 3 decades ago as a journalist. I've worked in radio, in television, in print, and online. I've been a practitioner. I was a working journalist for a long time. I was also a boss of journalists and a critic and observer of the news media. I have researched and written pretty extensively about public media, specifically in Canada and elsewhere around the world. And I've been working in the digital realm since about 1999 and have been very much, my whole career has been part of what I think we sometimes call the digital transition. So that's me. I am here representing only myself. I see your role as trying to advance the public interest, and I see my role as trying to help you do that. So You are here, I think, considering whether to provide support or encouragement to the news industry to stage a forum of some kind on the news media, what it needs in light of the crisis. And I want to start by agreeing that there is a crisis, and I think that you have a role to play in helping to solve it. And I have 3 quick thoughts for you in terms of how I think you can approach that. And this is in the nature of opening remarks, and so my goal here is to lay out areas that maybe we would want to talk more about. So first, I think that whatever it is that you end up doing, I think it's really critical for you to be extremely precise about the nature of the problem that you are trying to solve. I think the problem is not legacy media organizations are having difficulty or are going out of business. And I think the problem is not that journalists don't have enough job security or cannot pay their rent or their mortgages. I think the way I see it, the problem is that this country right now is not producing enough depth and breadth of journalism to the point where the citizenry can be appropriately informed and power can be appropriately held to account. That's the problem, I think, that you should be aiming to try to solve. So how to support the conditions in which good journalism can be made. Second, I've had the sense that the digital policy that's been developed over the last couple of years has been driven perhaps too much by the needs and interests of industry. I decided to run the numbers to see if my sort of sense of that was correct, and I think that I am right. I looked at the current Parliament witness appearances to this committee, and by my count, 77% of those appearances have been people who represent industry or industry workers. And so that's like people who represent media companies, they represent unions, trade associations, professional associations. If you look at the Senate committee, their numbers are pretty similar. And if you look at lobbyist communications with the Heritage Department, those numbers are also pretty similar. So I have the sense from watching your previous meetings that you may have a kind of general agreement that you should stay out of the driver's seat and you should let the news media drive when it comes to solving these problems. And I want to kind of inject a note of caution into that. I can see why you would believe that, right, to let the experts handle things. But I think it is actually a mistake because I think you have different roles and you have different goals. So if the industry leads, it is going to center its own interests, right? And that is not what you want. What you want is to center the public interest. And so I think it's important that you guys keep the authority to do that. I think it's your job. My last point, until pretty recently, I think it's been the case that digital players have been largely invisible, I think, to you, and also vice versa. And I feel like we saw this in the C11 and the C18 hearings, where digital-first creators were turning up at committee meetings for the very first time. During the current Parliament, witness appearances to this committee, by my count, only 12% have been digital players. And what that means is people from companies like Google and Netflix and Apple, digital-first creators, people who do YouTube and Twitch, academics who study digital stuff, and people from digital-focused civil society organizations like Open Media or the Internet Society. So that's a lot of people, right? That's a broad array of digital players. All of them put together count up to only 12% of the people who've come to speak with you here. And so I would urge you to consider rebalancing. When you're considering these questions, rebalancing where you're putting your attention. And I'm going to wrap it up there, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. And the next witness would be Jen Gerson, co-founder of The Line and Independent Journalism. Ms. Gerson is online, I think. You have for 5 minutes, please, begin.
Hi, thank you very much for having me at this committee. I'm a bit of a problematic creature and one of those persnickety digital-first creators that Sue was referencing. Something I think that I would just follow up on Sue's comment there is that I agree with what she said, and I think there's often people who are trying to fix these problems and regulate in the space are often conflating the difference between the business of journalism and the act of journalism. They're related problems, but they're not the same problems. So if you can't fundamentally understand why the business has failed, you're going to fall into the trap of trying to throw more money onto a failing industry are a failing problem, as opposed to thinking from the public interest perspective, which is how can we improve the acts of journalism to ensure the public interest is being served here. It's a very different framing of the problems we're facing, and I think it requires a very different mindset. But further to what we're actually here to discuss, I feel like I'm at a bit of a disadvantage, because when we talk about a national forum on media, I'm not strictly sure what's being proposed here, and I find myself as a result in a very rare position of not having a strongly held opinion on it. That's very unusual for me, so you're going to have to forgive me. I think in principle, having a national forum to discuss the issues facing news media and the democratic deficit that's going to come of that crisis and is coming of that crisis could be a really great thing. I'm not sure why this committee needs to approve that if what we're proposing here is that the news industry itself forward such an idea that members of the government would be a part of, or who should be putting it together. I mean, that strikes me as a fairly logistical problem or logistical challenge to solve. My ideal of that kind of a forum would be one that has a really wide diversity of opinions, that's bringing a lot of different ideas to the table from a public interest perspective, and is open to a lot of different potential solutions where the government could be helpful. My fear is that a national forum isn't really being used as a national forum to discuss these things in an open way, but rather is being used as a PR exercise to drum up public support for a foregone conclusion. If you're going to create a national forum to create support or to manufacture the concept of support for writing legacy media organizations ever bigger checks, I think that would be a bit of a waste of time. And if that is the conclusion that everybody is working toward, then why are we wasting our time here? Just write the check. I mean, that's kind of my concern with where this is going to go. But that being said, I think a really open discussion about the problems facing media, talk about those business issues, talk about where the public interests are, factors are at. And, if you want to have a discussion about further public funding for media, or the further, turning the private media into the public media, which is essentially the path we're on right now, then let's have a really candid, open conversation about what that's going to cost the taxpayer and over what time frame. A forum could be a great opportunity to do all that, provided it's being done in a really open spirit and a really good faith way. I don't think I have anything else to add there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gerson. And then I will go to April Lindgren, professor of the University School of Journalism in Toronto. Ms. Lindgren?
Thank you. I'm a professor of journalism at Toronto Metropolitan University, and thank you for inviting me here. I run something called the Local News Research Project, and in that capacity, I've been tracking developments in local journalism since about 2008. I'm not going to list, of course, all the recent announcements that add up to bad news for people who are counting on local journalism to keep them informed. I think everybody has a pretty good idea of that. But I will say that there's no obvious silver bullet solution to the challenges that news media in Canada, or anywhere else for that matter, are facing. News organizations are casting around for alternative business models at a time when people are disengaging from news, when social media outlets are playing a lesser role in referrals to news organizations, when advertising's down and shows little sign of recovery, and when Canadians' willingness to pay for digital news has actually been declining, I think largely in part because what they're being offered is not great. And why would you pay for it? So I thought, again, like Jen, I'm a bit confused about the nature of the forum, but I thought I would kind of focus my comments on the appropriateness of government providing support for the news sector and how that might play out in a discussion and what should be talked about. I do think that there is a role for this conversation, if only to help Canadians understand that they are getting less and less access to the news they need to effectively participate in the democratic process, engage with their communities, and navigate daily life. The government's own polling last summer showed that more than half, I think about 56% of people surveyed, thought that the number of news media outlets has stayed the same over the last 10 years. This changed when participants were presented with some data on how many outlets have actually closed. And when they were armed with that knowledge, 47% of people said it was a matter of some concern. That data, by the way, came from the local news map, which I run. And our most recent report showed that more than 500 local news outlets have closed in the last 15 years. 3/4 of them were community newspapers, and only half as many have launched over the same period, most of which are not surprisingly digital plays that I think are playing a growing and important role in the news landscape, local news landscape in particular. Now, another issue I think that needs to be talked about is, in terms of the context of what is the role in government in supporting local news, is to ask if government actually has the information that it needs to make informed decisions about the policies it's adopting. For instance, we don't really know where there are true news deserts where no local news is available in Canada, despite all the conversations about that. So it's impossible. And so how is good policy going to be developed out of that if we don't actually know where the needs are the greatest? And how can that situation be rectified? So I think that's a headache for news organizations. We also don't know which news organizations, what news organizations exist at the community level across the country. You pick a place on the map. We have no idea what's going on there in terms of the providers of local news. Again, could we create a searchable directory, first of all, for purposes of policymaking, but even more importantly, in an increasingly complex world, so that people locally can go somewhere and find out what the sources of local news are that they can go to directly. My next suggestion is that whatever the forum takes, there should be a serious conversation about the role of the CBC at a time when news outlets are closing shop, scaling back service, and telling Canadians they can't afford to cover news in their communities, while also satisfying the needs of their shareholders. What will the local landscape look like if the CBC English language service is defunded in the way as is being proposed by the Conservative Government of Canada? Do we think that for-profit media is going to go on a massive hiring binge in that aftermath to fill in the gaps? And more so, what does cutting millions of dollars from the CBC budget, as is currently underway, what does that mean for local coverage? We have yet to hear that from the CBC. So when I talk about what do I mean by an informed discussion about the role of the public broadcaster, I'm talking about a place where we can actually talk about the growing body of academic literature that links strong public media to a bunch of benefits. They've been shown to produce news that's more diverse and has more substance than their commercial counterparts. Public media also tend to produce programming that more broadly serves poor communities and more disadvantaged populations than for-profit media that for-profit media tend to neglect. There's also research showing that public media and government-subsidized private media are actually no less critical than the government than non-subsidized privately owned media. Have a look at the National Post.
30 seconds, Ms. Lundgren.
Post Media has received lots of money from the federal government in recent times, and I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that it's a friendly partner in the active Liberal government. I don't have any sweeping suggestions for solving the problem of media, but I do have some specifics we can talk about later on in the question period. That's on a more granular level.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lundgren. And I'm going to now go to Colette Brun, who is professor of the Centre d'études sur le média.
Bonjour.
Hello, I will be speaking French. Thank you for inviting me to contribute to your reflection on the state of the media in Canada and its future. This issue has been at the heart of my work as a scholar and educator at Laval University for over 20 years now. Since 2020, I've chaired the Independent Advisory Board on Eligibility for Journalism Tax Measures with the Canada Revenue Agency. This experience has enabled me to become more familiar with the diversity of the Canadian media landscape and to participate in the implementation of an innovative public policy measure. Today I'm speaking to you in my capacity as director of the Centre. the Centre d'études sur les médias, Center for Media Studies, a nonprofit research and knowledge transfer organization founded in 1992. So I'd like to say something that the others have already said. This debate that you're undertaking with us and with Canadians on the question of news and media should be centered first and foremost on the public interest. That may be cliche, but it's important to repeat it. Access to comprehensive, reliable, quality news on public affairs is a fundamental condition of democracy. Once again, maybe that's a cliche, but it's also a very old problem. I don't think anyone will disagree that the current situation is critical. It's an unprecedented crisis because of the speed and complexity of the transformation that's going on, be it technological, economic, or even disinformation and hacking. This is a structural and economic crisis, but also a crisis in confidence and relevance, I'd say, relevance of journalism in daily lives of citizens. That is what's most concerning to me. We have to rethink the business model and rebuild public trust if information isn't present in their everyday lives. If it's not really important to them, or worse, if they actively seek to avoid the news. So I suggest that you consider citizens as the starting point and the end point of this discussion. This is not to minimize the precarious situation of journalists, companies, unions, and the journalistic community as a whole over the past few years, and particularly over the past year. We have thousands of layoffs. On the contrary, the working conditions and financial health of the media, new and old, have a direct impact on the quality and quantity of news. We must support them, but by keeping in the needs of and interests of citizens in mind, I believe we can more clearly target the best means of action. Since 2016, the Centre for Media Studies has been the Canadian partner of Digital News Report, an annual international survey of news practices and perceptions on platforms. We've also produced a number of qualitative studies on citizens' information practices, particularly those of young adults. Over the past 10 years, digital platforms have overtaken television as the main mode of news consumption, and social media have become the default source for many people, even if the majority of respondents have a rather negative perception of these platforms when it comes to news. We also published a survey conducted last September among Quebecers on the suppression of news on meta platforms following the enactment of the Online News Act. This study showed that most people were aware of this measure and they were affected by it, and a third had already adopted different practices to keep informed. Respondents also felt that the government had an important role to play to ensure access to quality information. So, here are a few ideas that are geared to citizens' information needs.
30 seconds?
43.
43 seconds?
Yeah.
Une aide à...
Increased support for local and regional news media, including community media, both print and broadcast, to ensure that everyone has access to local information on issues of public interest. Targeted support for efforts by the media and other civil society organizations to bring information closer to the interests of target audiences, especially young people. I won't talk about tax credits since I'm directly involved, but I would say program for continuing education and paid internships aimed at developing the relevance of journalism for citizens. Thank you.
You can elaborate as we get questions, Ms. Bryn. Now I go to Jackie Fortin, L'École Supérieure. Ms. Fortin?
Hello. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Good afternoon. Since 1967, the Cégep de Jonquière has been a pioneer in technical training in communications and media, introducing a 3-year college diploma with profiles in journalism, television production, advertising, and radio broadcasting. This is under the same roof in a regional CEGEP in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean under the name Arts et Technologies des Médias. 50-some years later, the program offering has evolved with the Quebec media industry. We now have 850 students in our 3 programs. We are training the talent of tomorrow. Multimedia integration film and television is the largest such program. We're very concerned about the upheaval in the media industry. We're seeing internships dwindle, and we're seeing this is a problem for our identity, culture, and democracy. In a time of disinformation, our mission is more important than ever. The Cégep de Jonquière is rooted in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, a region renowned for its strong journalistic presence thanks to its many print, TV, and radio media. One concrete example of the crisis recently, this week, following Bell's decision last week to cut broadcasting, yesterday morning, Monday, day before yesterday, on my way to work, on one of Bell's 2 stations, I was in my car going to work. The regional news bulletin had been replaced by a local bulletin from the network in Montreal. The 3 news briefs were one in Trois-Rivières, 330 kilometers away from the Saguenay, one on a court case in Chicoutimi, and one on temperature variations in Gatineau, Montreal, and Sherbrooke. Nothing about ice fishing in La Baie, nothing about the Massayache wind farm project. These were news items on Le Quotidien that morning. It's true that the country's media are affected by the current crisis. That's true at the national level, but it's local news that will be most effective in the short term. That's true right now. On February 29th and March 1st, we've undertaken to rally all the media players from different regions of Quebec around a single point to take the time to reflect on possible solutions for the future of regional information. So we're organizing a summit on regional news. The place of young people in this industry, funding, and so on. We believe that our status as an educational institution can be a unifying force, bringing all parties together for discussion: employers, employees, unions, members of government, students, social players, and more. After all, quality information benefits us all. Will this summit on the future of regional information solve everything? Even with my normally positive outlook, the answer is no, but at least it's a step in the right direction. In this current crisis, we need to be able to establish a dialogue to propose innovative and sustainable solutions, to move away from the quest for increased profits, and to get away from the rhetoric against progress and change. Because our media will have no choice but to change their approach in order to continue. Doing more with less is a fine theory, but probably not a viable one for our society in the long term. We need to use the changes required as vectors for development, do things differently together, because the strength needed to continue is to be united, not isolated. It's not just a matter of business leaders, nor employees, nor just government. Information is a fundamental right in our democracy. That is the duty of everyone to support that. In a discussion with a teacher last week, she reminded me how the most democratic countries all had active media in quantity and free to question. Few media, no freedom of the press, and a low profile was a sign of an undemocratic state. Is that where we want to? We're proud to say that we live in a democratic country where all voices can be heard. This is an opportunity, but also a shared responsibility. It's vital to act now to support our media and ensure a future for our information, international, national, and regional. We must maintain our freedom to think, question, and criticize according to our values and heritage. We want to make sure that media continues to be respected.
Is Annick Forrest. Annick, National Union President of the Canadian Media Guild.
Oui, bonjour. Mon nom, c'est...
Good afternoon. My name is Annick Forêt, not Forrest. I am a Francophone, an Acadian, and a Quebecer. I am president of the Canadian Media Guild, a union representing 6,000 media workers across the country.
Grateful for the opportunity to address a matter of great significance to Canadians and a pressing concern for its members who are media workers. The crisis in the Canadian media sector stemming from the dominance of foreign digital companies. The CMG believes that safeguarding Canadian media jobs, protecting quality Canadian journalism, and guaranteeing the availability of Canadian content will ensure the vitality of the Canadian media sector. As a cornerstone of our democracy, Canadian media plays a crucial role in informing, engaging, and empowering citizens, but this mission can only be realized with a robust and resilient workforce. Media workers are the backbone of our information ecosystem, tirelessly researching, reporting, and disseminating news and stories that shape public discourse. I am a media worker with 30 years of experience. I started working when we were cutting tape to do radio, and I finished before I started this job as president of the CMG doing digital news editing. In a sense, I was the person editing the stories that went online on the Radio-Canada website in the west of Canada. Media workers have gone from one type of media to the next type of media to the next type of media. These are different mediums. What's important is the message. The mediums, they will keep changing. So as president of a union representing Canadian media workers, we believe in that union that protecting our labor rights within the media industry is paramount. Safeguarding media workers' rights to fair wages, safe working conditions, and collective bargaining upholds the dignity and well-being of these workers and fortifies the integrity of our media institutions. Misinformation and disinformation pose profound challenges to the integrity and credibility of Canadian media. They erode public trust, disrupt democratic discourse, and undermine the credibility of legitimate news sources. We believe that by fortifying the resilience of Canadian media against the threats of disinformation and misinformation, we can safeguard the integrity of our democratic institutions and ensure that Canadians have access to reliable, trustworthy Canadian information. The CMG believes that to preserve and celebrate their culture, Canadians must have access to their stories told by members of their communities. Bringing Canada to Canadians is the mandate of some public broadcasters, but it's the daily goal of all Canadian media workers. Media outlets such as TVO, APTN, and CBC Radio-Canada play a vital role in shaping and reflecting the unique identity of our nation by offering platforms for Canadian voices and perspectives. Québécoise et acadienne, j'ai grandi à Dieppe au Nouveau-Brunswick.
I grew up in Dieppe, New Brunswick. Our culture was nourished by access to media that talk to us in our language. That's a gift that today is not available to all Canadians.
President of our APTN branch would be by my side today, but that was not possible. I humbly speak on his behalf and that of our APTN members, whose job it is to report on events and issues relevant to their audiences from a perspective they cannot get from mainstream news media outlets. The CMG supports Bruce's belief that every tribal group in the country should have its own APTN, its own media network, regionally and locally, so that languages of every tribal group and the societal concepts that go with them are spoken and learned in the home of its members, no matter where that home may be. The work done by APTN is essential to supporting Aboriginal culture and ties into the recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada.
Please.
Excuse me? 30 seconds. Okay. So, I'm not going to talk about securing funding sources for Canadian media, as that is vital and diverse to vibrant media landscape, and I'll go right to our recommendations that the forum explore public funding mechanisms, innovative financing models and partnership for public and private media, that the forum explore avenues to protect each community with the media workers and the mediums they need so that their voices be heard and their stories be told, and that the forum examine possible avenues to uphold quality Canadian journalism, including media literacy education and how to impose greater accountability for creators and distributors of information. The CMG further recommends that the forum examine how to best support Aboriginal Canadians who wish to become media workers. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you and present you with our thoughts. And I'll leave you with one last thought that I think is very important. It's not just about the medium. It's about bringing a message to Canadians. So when you make rules, when you make laws, when you make whatever decisions that you might make, don't only think television, don't only think radio. It's not about airwaves, it's about bringing the message, a quality message to Canadians, and the way that message is brought to Canadians will change. Right now, people are looking at
Ms.
sources,
Forey.
different sources.
You can elaborate later on when you ask the question.
We'll be happy to do so.
That's good. Thank you very much. And now we go to the question and answer component of the meeting, and we begin with the 6-minute round. And that 6 minute, everyone should know, includes a question and the answer. So please be as concise as you possibly can with your questions and similarly with your answers. And so we begin with the Conservatives for 6 minutes. Rachel Thomas, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for taking the time to be with us today. Some of you I know came on quite short notice, so we very much appreciate the efforts that you've put into making the arrival. Sure. My first question here has to do with some of the things that we've observed just as of late in the last few days. We know that Bell has made the determination to lay off about 4,800 employees. We know that they came out and made the decision, that they purported to make this decision based on government regulations. Bill C-18 was a detriment to them, Bill C-11, but then also the requirement to share spectrum that they had built infrastructure for. And so these policies that came out of the federal government were actually incredibly harmful then to Bell, but to the news industry. We know that 600 of those employees were journalists. So that being the case, now here today we're discussing the federal government extending its hand again by being involved in a forum, or at least setting the terms of a forum, and whether or not it would be appropriate for news outlets to host such a thing. It seems like a bizarre question to me that the government would somehow determine whether or not it is even appropriate for news businesses to meet, as if it's the government's decision. Why can't news businesses meet all on their own accord, have a fruitful discussion, and should they wish to, invite government stakeholders to the table to listen to what they have to say? Anyways, nevertheless, I would also highlight Bill C-11 and Bill C-18 and the detriment that those have had. So Bill C-11, of course, has built walls around digital-first creators, and to the point that was raised by Ms. Gardner, as well as Ms. Garrison, and I believe one other witness raised this point as well. This is really where so many people are obtaining their news, is from those digital-first creators, those digital platforms. And now through Bill C-11, walls have been built around them, therefore stifling their reach. Furthermore, Bill C-18 actually has prevented Canadians from being able to access news. It has not generated more to the public good, but rather has taken away from the public good. And then further to that, what was supposed to be about $300 to $350 million given to the news industry in order to help prop them up. And in particular, it was touted as something that would support newspapers. In fact, actually, Facebook said no to being regulated, and then Google went behind a closed door with the government and entered into a shady backroom deal and actually got an exemption from Bill C-18 and instead created some other contractual deal where they're giving $100 million to the news media of really their choice. Further to that, that $100 million isn't actually a full $100 million because it's supposed that $25 million of that was already granted, so it's really only a new $75 million. All that to say, There's been a lot of overpromising and a lot of underdelivering when the government gets involved. And so my question will lead out to Ms. Garrison first, and that is, if the government is not to be involved, which I believe I've laid out a few case points for why that would be a bad idea, then what are the alternatives to the news industry in Canada having longevity?
Sorry, unmute. So I think there's 2 points I would make in response to that question. The first is, if we're sitting here at the Heritage Committee deciding who's going to cover the drinks tab of the National Forum, I'm all for it. If you're going to have a collection of journalists, we would expect an open bar. Secondly, I would say, look, if I'm the federal government and I'm concerned about the democratic deficit that this country is facing as a result of decline in media or decline or the collapse of the business model in media, if I'm you, I already have 2 extremely big sticks that I can use to start to bring things into a more proper balance without talking about C18, without talking about C11, without talking about new legislation, and without talking about necessarily new funding from the taxpayers. The first stick is the CBC, and I believe Ms. Lindgren already made this point. If we are concerned about local news, if we're concerned about news deserts, it seems to me like the place where the federal government has an enormous impact on this industry is through public media. I have had some very interesting conversations with conservatives who are very angry with the CBC and perceive the CBC to be very biased, which is rightly or wrongly where I think a lot of Canadians are at across the political spectrum. And I think the CBC in its current formation can't serve the function that it needs to serve to try and fix a lot of the democratic deficits that we're facing. I do think that you need to look at a fundamental reimagining of what the CBC is, and to also reimagine it as a much more locally focused news outlet, potentially one that is not competing with private outlets, potentially one that has, for example, mandated reporters in every town above 100,000 people, potentially a CBC that sees itself less as a private broadcast competitor and more as like a public library of journalism. Maybe a CBC that sees itself as providing news, video, and audio-visual content to all of Canadians to do with what they wish, so that they can use that to create their own sort of local journalism practices, podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. I think that there is an obvious place for the federal government to
11
focus its
seconds.
energy here. The second one is obviously regulatory. We have an oligopoly in telecommunications, and this comes with extreme regulatory pressure on existing major, highly profitable telecommunications companies, force them to spend their money on journalism as part of their broadcasting license, and enforce those heavily and appropriately. These are the 2 big sticks you have right in front of you that I don't see the federal government stepping up to use.
Thank you. I now go to the next question, and that is the Liberals. Anna Gainey for 6 minutes. But before I turn the clock on for Ms. Gainey, I would like to clarify something. The Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage is not a government committee. It's a committee made up of all political parties, the NDP, the Bloc, the Conservatives, and the Liberals. The committee made up of all those parties voted for this particular study. We are not a government body deciding what government should do. So this is a study brought about by one of our members, and everybody thought it was a good idea. Just want to clarify what's going on here. Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Gainey, for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci beaucoup à...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank all the witnesses with us here today. We appreciate your comments. I'd like to start with Ms. Forêt. I'd like to know, in your opinion, what's the interest in having a discussion on this important topic? What would be the desirability of having it done by the industry itself? I think that what's important is not limiting it to the sector itself. Everyone should be able to participate. I agree with many of the witnesses here today who said that we have to think of citizens first. That is, we don't work in a vacuum. Journalists work to bring news to Canadian citizens. They're not doing this just to make money. It's not an occupation that makes you rich. It's a job that we do because we want to inform our compatriots. We want to bring the news to everyone. So it's important to know what Canadians want, what they're looking for, and what we can give them too as media workers. One can talk about funding, but in the final analysis, the important thing is to have high-quality journalism in Canada produced by Canadians for Canadians, so that we're not subject to news that comes from elsewhere. The proximity, having people in the regions, that's very important so that people can recognize themselves. And I'm not talking only about francophones in minority situations outside Quebec or anglophones who are minorities in Quebec, but also our First Nations who are spread throughout the country. We've just started at Radio-Canada CBC, where I worked for 30 years, just started increasing their presence in the north. But that presence has to be members of the northern communities who are talking to their fellow citizens. And that's important. There are a lot of levels there. There's the level of education. How do you train journalists? The way of bringing this information to people, how to make sure that the media landscape in the country is multi-layered. You can't have only one or two or three media outlets. Somebody mentioned that. You have to have many sources of information. There's not one journalist who will bring you news with only one source. He'll look for two or three sources. The same is true for media. Citizens have to have access to many sources to get better quality information and make decisions in a democratic country. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to give my time to my colleague here, Talib.
Yes, well, all right, Mr. Nur Mohammed, you have 2 minutes and 55 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question really, I have a question for you, Professor Lindgren. As we talk about the importance of this sector, the importance of journalism, the importance of being able to have conversations about independent media and journalism in this country. And yesterday, Canadians witnessed an attack on a journalist by the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, in which he discredited a journalist, he attacked the journalist, he used all manner of tactics to evade and avoid answering a simple question by attacking the integrity of a journalist. And I'm wondering, as somebody who teaches journalism, what message does that send to those young people that want to enter the sector of journalism? What message does it send to those that believe in a free press in this country?
Well, I think those sorts of responses to legitimate questions, seeking information on the public's behalf, because that's what journalists are doing, do harm the journalism as a whole and erode this notion of trust that we have and we've seen eroding over time. I mean, journalists aren't perfect and we make mistakes and we shouldn't get away with them. But I think when asking, pushing back and questioning the integrity of a journalist, when the journalist is doing their job, basically, should be, is really problematic, and it erodes the whole process, which is journalists are out there doing the job that people can't do as part of their regular lives because they're working, they're raising their kids, and journalists are playing that role of being present to ask those questions on behalf of the public. So the message I give to my students is don't be cowed by this. We can't give up, and we have to stick with it, even though at times it seems like it's a really difficult battle, as we're seeing from these types of responses, and also the sort of attacks and verbal and otherwise on journalists as they go about doing their jobs. TV reporters that are harassed in the field. This is all part of an erosion of the democratic process that makes it difficult for people to get the information they need to participate in local democracy.
Thank you very much for that. I simply want to say that I know there are many Canadians across this country that value the work that journalists do, especially when they're trying to get difficult questions answered. holding government to account, holding opposition to account. Their job is to ask questions. And I just want to say on behalf of this side and many other members I know in this room, thank you to the journalists that do the work that you do in the face of nonsense like we saw yesterday.
I'll go to the Bloc Québécois, Martin Champoux. 6 minutes, please, Martin.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin my speaking time by pointing something out. I heard a lot of questions about the government's involvement on holding this national forum on the media. The purpose of this study we're doing is to figure out who's in the best position and what are the best ways of having that kind of forum. It's certainly not up to the government to get involved in that. But as a committee, I think we can bring together people and ask questions that will lead to holding a national forum that will be done in a constructive and objective way without partisanship. That's the purpose of today's meeting. So to answer Ms. Gardner's comment, no worries. I don't think the media should be those who undertake this study alone. It should be different players from various fields who have to come together and take over this forum. That's why I'm glad to have Mr. Fortin with us today. Mr. Fortin, ATM, your organization, published an open letter a few months ago. I think it was in November. 67 signatures from people from the Cégep de Jonquière who are teachers in the ATM program. One that has a concern about the future of media. And you're having a summit on local media in late February, early March. Who should be at that table to discuss the future of the media? Is it the media or experts? Who do you see around the table? Who did you invite to sit around that table? Well, what we're thinking is that it should be everyone who's involved, concerned. Media have to be there because in the final analysis, they're the ones who make decision and decide what to do. I think journalists who are employees must also participate. I don't think that the solution comes from one single person. I think unions have a place too. I think people from the communities have a place, community players or political ones. Journalism is close to the people, but often it's the people in these communities, in the community sector, who are the most affected, because when they need to do something and find out something or communicate it to the media, they have to have that local media. If they don't have it anymore, they can't bring their message to the population. So you have to have concerted effort by everyone. I think everyone has to pull in the same direction. That's why we decided to do that. We think it's important to support education about the media. We train young people who want to work in this, but we want to bring everyone together. I find that interesting. We had an opportunity to talk about it, you and I, but I'd like to put the question to Madame Brin as well. She works with students. How do students see the future of the media? Because I think they too have something to say about this. They're the ones who are going to be doing this in the future. Are they worried? Do they have a different vision from the one we see generally right now? What do you hear from your students? Yes, I see my students every week, and we do discuss those issues. They are of their generation. They look to the future. They have many reasons to be optimistic and interested in the transformation of the media landscape, the digital landscape. Of course, they're worried about job prospects. And as I said earlier, paid internships are hard to find, particularly in the regions. Many media need young workers. They are looking for people, but they can't pay them. But they are passionate. I think Jackie would agree with me in April too. The students give us a lot of hope in the future because they are in that universe. They have all sorts of creative solutions to do journalism on different platforms. So we get a lot of energy from listening to these students. We have to give them their place. Maybe they don't know to what extent their role is important. But we have to listen to them, that's for sure. Jackie, I'd get back to you. In the discussion that has to happen about the future of news media, there are certainly observations that are difficult. There are things that are going to hurt sometimes. Do you think that traditional media, the most vulnerable media right now, do you think they're able to see the future with optimism? Do you think that they're prepared to accept conclusions by experts that may be consulted? Maybe it won't be what they want to hear. Do you think they can come up with observations that will mean that the whole industry has to reinvent itself, redefine itself to face the future? Are we ready for that? Well, I think I have a bad answer, but it's no, simply because, and this is true in all spheres of society, any change brings difficulties in adapting. It takes will to go forward and change things. Like Colette said, it's true that young people have that desire to change things and do things differently. If we have a problem today in the media is that young consume less media, not necessarily at the college or university level, but even at primary school or high school. We have to get them to think critically about news media because they're the society of tomorrow. We have to trust them and push them in that direction. Of course, change is difficult, but if we don't address it, if we don't refer to those young people to find solutions for the industry itself won't change. We try to get them to be curious and seek out other sources of information and just not swallow everything that's sent to them. Maybe we have to start in elementary school. Well, I think that's something that has to be done. It's part and parcel of education for a society that can be critical. And, there's AI coming up that's already here, really. That won't facilitate this problem of disinformation. So we have to help the young become critical.
I now I go to the New Democrats and Ms. Ms. Ashton, please. Nikki.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses that are joining us here today. In recent years, it's become clear that Canada has continued to have some of the greatest media consolidation in the world. We know that in recent years, this has only become worse. At this point, Post Media owns more than 80% of newspapers that operate in Canada. I believe around 110 newspapers. We know that the takeover merger between Rogers and Shaw has led to the closure of media stations across the country. The most recent devastating announcement by Bell Media has led to the cancellation of local and regional newscasts in all forms, in all mediums. I've often said that Canada is made up of three media conglomerates in a trench coat, and the reality is that Canada has a role and the federal government has a role to not just keep tabs on what's going on, but to put a stop to the entrenchment of this oligopoly that has clearly only led to the shutting down of local news media, the laying off of thousands of reporters, journalists, people that get us the news, and I would say a limitation in terms of the perspectives, the need for diverse perspectives that we all expect to hear when we are accessing media. So my question to a few of the witnesses, and because I want to make sure we hear from a number of you, if you could keep your comments brief, is media consolidation in Canada a problem? And is there a role for the federal government to rein in the kinds of mergers we've seen recently, the buyouts that we've seen recently, and the kind of corporate expansion that we've seen recently of media conglomerates that have led to the cuts we've seen in local media and beyond, and have led us to this crisis that we're facing right now. And first, if I can go to Ms. Gerson, I think you mentioned the word oligopoly. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, totally agree. It's a media oligopoly. It's a grocery oligopoly. It's a telecom oligopoly. Break it up. And also, I completely agree with that. And also at the same time, as I tried to point out in the last question, use the regulatory powers that you have on to control and dictate some of the content coming out of the major broadcast organizations, which are making billions of dollars in profit, and require them to put some of that money into journalism as a condition of their broadcasting license. This is an obvious place to start.
Thank you. And if I could go to Madame Forêt.
Yeah, I think, as I said before, it's very important to have lots of sources of information. And yes, I agree that consolidation of any industry is never a good thing. So yeah, we have to ensure mediatic diversity across Canada. And any way that the government can support that, being creative in the ways to make sure that the different media organizations serve and have mandates to serve Canadians across the country, it's something that we have to look at and study.
Thank you. And if I could go to Ms. Lindgren for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the horse has left the barn. You know, to force them to break up, I'm not sure. There's not much left there. You know, I look at the newsroom. I used to work in the Ottawa Citizen back in 1990. They had 190 people in their newsroom. Today, there's fewer than 20. So I think I would err more on the side of what can we do to create an environment for viable competitors. New digital startups, of which there are some that are effective models that we could look at, and are there ways to encourage more of that? So I think creating opportunities for real competitors is probably a more viable way of going, rather than trying to breathe life into semi-comatose traditional newsrooms in many cases.
Okay, thank you. I want to shift a bit to a focus on rural media and the immense ground that we've lost. I represent northern Manitoba, where our local media is literally hanging by a thread. Our newspapers have fewer than 10 staff, and even that's a lot. They're certainly facing all sorts of economic challenges, and then our public broadcaster, the CBC, that has a mandate to provide news to Canadians, that actually has a station based here in my hometown of Thompson, has not filled this job in a sustainable fashion for the last at least 5 years. Despite many of us saying that simply isn't right, I would say that many of the communities here in our region, Indigenous communities, northern rural communities, are not having their stories or perspectives shared simply because there's nobody around to do that work. And those that do exist have very little to no budget to cover these stories. And unfortunately, the CBC has been missing in action despite their obligations. Ms. Lindgren, I was very interested in hearing your proposal around mapping the media desert that exists in northern and rural Canada. And I'm wondering if you could share with us how important this work ought to be for the federal government. Is this work that we need to be doing right now?
Nikki, I think your time is up. Can we get you in this next round to ask Ms. Lindgren that question again, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to go to the second round. It's a 5-minute round, and I begin with the Conservatives. Jacques Good. For 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank all the witnesses who are present. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Cégep de Jonquière for its reputation for excellence in media studies, as well as Laval University for its programs, which are dedicated to news, because I have the 2 daughters at the University of Quebec, too, who are lucky, who found good jobs in communications and production. They gave us a lot of hope, and I think our young people in general give us a lot of hope in this highly competitive sector. We have to be aware that digital platforms have changed this environment very much for the future. The loss of media revenue that goes abroad in social media. We don't have those in Canada anymore, so that's a major challenge. So I'd like to put a question to Mr. Fortin. Beyond hope and the young see hope, they see their whole future ahead of them, they have great projects. But are there some that get discouraged? Are placement rates still good for these young people, given all the students you have at Jonquière? Are they all positive? Their answer is no. But I think there are many who are and who have trust in the future. As far as placement rates, I can't answer you for this year because we don't have statistics yet. In past years, it's been excellent. What we're seeing now is that it's harder to request internships because of cutbacks here and there. That's something we've noted this year. But I think that the young want to change things. They want to evolve. Those who make their mark will manage to get through this. What I find unfortunate is that we really need these young people in the news media. It's difficult for them to get internships and jobs, especially when there are cuts in this market. Would there be some way to give an incentive to the media industry to continue to hire them? Innovative ways, because we really need them for the next many years, because losing a whole generation of future media workers, especially our young, would be a terrible loss. Mr. Fortin first, and if other witnesses want to answer, please go ahead. Well, I think right now our media are not producing a lot of news for the young. That's one observation. I think Radio-Canada does interesting things with web journals, more punchy and shorter things that interest the young. There are things on TikTok as well. But is going on TikTok viable for everyone? I don't think so. I think we're redoing what Facebook was 3 years ago, and then we'll get to get back to the same square. That's a personal comment, but I think employers take the young and they may develop that niche. There's a crisis right now. We're in it. We feel it. It's more difficult, but things will settle down soon, and there will be internships that will open up sooner or later. Are there other witnesses who'd like to comment on this? Inaudible. Ms. Lindgren?
The local journalism initiative, which has placed, I think it's close to 1,200 people, journalists now, at news organizations across the country to fill what are described, the criteria as undercovered topics or areas or groups. I do think that is an opportunity for early stage journalists. I think that's coming up for renewed funding, and that should be that's a possibility, and one way forward for this. I would add that I do think that the way forward should include additional training for the people hired into these positions, because the content from what we've seen can be quite uneven. So there's an opportunity for professional development there, as well as getting young people's foot through the door, covering communities and people and issues that really need to be written about. The second point I would just make on this is that
17 seconds.
There's an opportunity to talk more about greater role for journalism schools in covering communities where there's that are underserved by local media, and we can talk about about that if anyone's interested.
Thank you very much. I now go to the Liberals. Ms. Dillon, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à nos témoins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the witnesses. I'll start with Ms. Brun. I think this interests everyone here, the topic of disinformation or false information. According to your experience at your center, could you discuss the need for regulation to fight disinformation in the media landscape right now? Thank you. Well, I don't think regulation as control or censorship is the solution. I think we have to work upstream to support other sources of news. That's what the government's been trying to do. That is to support the news ecosystem for high quality information rather than try to censor voices that we may consider problematic. In any case, disinformation sources are very savvy and numerous. It's a game of whack-a-mole. It's practically pointless. So there are things that are done in journalism, fact-checking. We talked about media education. That has to be done not only in schools. Yes, it should be done in schools. In Quebec schools, there is a program for culture and citizenship that is implemented. And there is digital education there. There are NGOs such as Ablo Media, called Media Smarts in English, that does a lot of very interesting work in communities with populations that may be more vulnerable to this type of thing. But this is a struggle that continues all the time. Since we're talking about media, news media, and a media ecosystem that is weak is a fertile ground for disinformation, but it also weakens by circulating all kinds of conspiracy theories on the media, on journalists. During the pandemic, for instance, there are people who thought that the media were accomplices of the government. There were critical reports that came out. So, to my mind, that's a symptom of the crisis we're talking about and not an isolated problem that we have to fight in and of itself. Now, in your opinion on the same topic, we fewer young people rely on the news. Do you think that's because of disinformation that they're consuming in social media? Young people consume social media because they grew up with it, with the digital media. They have not known the time where television, written press, and radio were the main sources of news. That's their environment. That's their generation. It's totally normal that they turn towards those platforms. And we see in our surveys that younger adults don't see much difference in the reliability of information given the platform compared to older adults who continue to trust legacy media. We have to just observe this. We can't point the finger of young people. I have two young adult children, and I ask them a lot about how they get news on these platforms, and I think that we can still use platforms that may not be traditional ones, but use them critically anyway, and we can use them intelligently. Things like Meta have problematic behavior when it comes to information, but I think Meta's response to C-18, with all due respect for the Conservative member, that was a problematic response, over the top. But I think these platforms have a very interesting role to play in democracy and democratic life. It's not all black and white. That's an incredible answer. I appreciate it a great deal. I appreciate the survey you did on this. So please continue your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now go to Monsieur Champoux. 2.5 minutes, please, Martin.
Sur le même sujet, Madame.
On the same subject, Ms. Brun, the World Economic Forum recently published a study on the perception of risk. I don't know if you are familiar with that study. One of the subgroups in this study reported that one of the major concerns in the next decade, one of the major world challenges, will be disinformation. You're talking about education as a way to counter disinformation, but do you think we're able to counter disinformation given the current state of affairs? without there being regulation or some kind of control by government? I'm not talking only about Canada, but everywhere in the world. What do you think? Well, there are measures that are more regulatory in Europe and in other contexts that you're probably familiar with that attack the role of the major platforms rather than try to legislate specifically. There's Germany, for instance, that orders them to withdraw some content, but it's hard to enforce that. There are a lot of problems with that. Just like moderation policies, it's always a risk that you do too much and censor content that is legitimate and relevant. Once the harm is done, it's too late. We can't solve this problem in a debate like this. There's a more fundamental problem with trust, confidence, and the ecosystem. I do like April. I called her by her first name because we know each other, but it'd be a good idea to have a repertory of sources in a community without saying, okay, if I want to get some news, there's these sources. We have to presume that people know these sources and support them. We have to support sources that are committed to doing rigorous work, be it journalism or a given type of information. I think that we have to be open to all kinds of... I only have a few seconds. Jackie Fortin, earlier, it was underscored many times that we have to keep the clientele at the heart of our concerns. How do you interest people in high-quality information? Do you have any solutions for that? Well, I think that they have to be part of that information, of that news, information that touches them, affects them personally. I didn't think you'd listen to the chair, but that was very concise. Thank you.
Please, for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Ashton?
Thank you. And I will be following up on the question on media deserts. I hope in my next round. I want to go to a question to the Canadian Media Guild around journalists and media workers that have lost their jobs. So we know, of course, that the Canadian Media Guild represents 6,000 workers in Canadian media, and that with the recent layoffs announced by both the CBC and Bill, your work couldn't be more vital. When Catherine Tate, the CEO and president of CBC, visited our committee recently, she mentioned how the across-the-board 3% cuts directly contributed to the job cuts the CBC has been implementing. If the announced job cuts go through as proposed, there will be less people working for the CBC for the CBC than even the darkest days of the Stephen Harper government. What role do you believe cuts to the CBC by the Liberal government have led to the loss of jobs for journalists?
Government throughout the years, whether they're Conservatives, Liberals, have cut at the CBC at different times. The Canadian government, they like us when they're not in power. They don't like us when we're in power, because what do journalists do? They criticize or they shed light on the work that's done by the people in power. So, of course, there's lots of stuff that's being done. I want people to remember that it's not just CBC, it's CBC, Radio-Canada. So, if there is any job loss, it's going to be on both sides. Our members at CBC Radio-Canada have a job to do. They're trying to fulfill the mandate that was given to them by the Canadian government, and they cannot do that work if they don't have the tools or the numbers to do that work. So if there is a mandate and we want people to fulfill that mandate, we have to give the tools to do the job. So, we do advocate for a good, stable, long-term financing for Radio-Canada CBC, for sure. I mean, they cannot plan long-term and they cannot continue to do the very important work that they do if they don't have stable financing. Media workers need to be remunerated at the level of the important work that they do. Like any other Canadian across the country, they have been taking, a salary decrease throughout the year.
Thank you, Ms. Foray. I will now go to the third round. Kevin Wall from the Conservatives. 5 minutes, please, Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is no trust in media today. I'm going to be honest. I was a broadcaster for over 4 decades. It's lost today, Ms. Gardner. We've seen even the president of the CBC hold her own forum in Toronto talking about lack of trust in her own organization, along with Torstar. So, you know, the public has lost faith and confidence in the media. And I don't know if it will ever come back, but once you lose it, people go elsewhere for their information. Care to comment on that?
I do. I would. And I really appreciate what you just said, and I found it very refreshing because it's extremely true. When I was planning to come here, I had to cancel an appointment with my audiologist, and I ended up talking to the receptionist about why I was canceling, and she told me that she thinks that the government being in any way involved with the news media completely destroys her trust in it, and she is no longer interested in the news media at all and does not listen to the news and follow the news in Canada, right? That's a random person, but 50%, I think the stats are roughly 50%, a little bit more than 50% of people, adults in this country, don't trust the news media. And there are reasons for that lack of trust, and the trust does have to be earned back, right? I think that we are talking a fair bit about the supply side of the problem here and in general in these conversations about how we can ensure that there is enough good quality journalism made and the conditions are such that it can be made. And I think that is a worthy conversation. But I think there's also a really, really deeply interesting conversation to be had about the demand side. Why aren't people consuming the news? Why are they turning away from consuming the news? I think there are many reasons for it. Some of them have nothing to do with problems inside the news industry itself. Some of them have to do with the explosion of consumer choice, the many options for ways in which you can spend your leisure time. The fact that consuming news is no longer a shared thing that we do together, so it's not modeled for us in the same way that it used to be. It's just on your phone now. Your kids maybe don't know that you're consuming the news, so maybe they don't pick up a news habit, et cetera, et cetera. There are many contributing factors. But we know that people feel alienated from what they perceive as people in positions of power and authority, which includes the news media and includes politicians, it includes your elected representatives. They don't feel like those people have their backs and are acting in their interests, and that's why they don't consume the news media. That's a really serious issue. You can build it. If they don't come, what good does that do anybody? We all have an interest in an informed citizenry, a population that understands what's going on around it. That's to everybody's benefit. So when a whole slew of people, half the people, are falling away from that and not participating in that, that's a society-wide problem.
Hey, let me add this. Stats Can released today, 13% English speakers have a high trust in media. 13%, 23 French speakers. 13 and 23%. Anyways, in June, when C-18 passed, I knew right away Bell Media was going to cut. I worked for them. I knew their strategy. That same day, they went to the CRTC and said, we want out of local news. Right? That same day. I was criticized by the Bloc in the House for that comment. I went out. I explained my situation on C-18 with the 3 or 4 cameras outside the House. Mr. Shampoo took a shot at me in the House about Bell Media. You support me. You made a comment here that C-18 would also reduce Canadians' access to journalism. So a bad idea from the start, C-18. Can you expand on the article that you have written to support me in June when I predicted Bell Media would no longer exist?
I did not write that article to support you. but yeah, I mean, there were a number of people, myself included, and many other people who did think that C-18 was misguided from the get-go, right? For many different reasons. I think I said early on, a lot of people said early on that Facebook was not bluffing, that Facebook was going to stay out, and they did stay out, and that does reduce Canadians' access to news, right? So, you know, C-18 has not brought in to will not bring into the industry the money that was originally predicted that it would bring into the industry. And I think, what are the estimates? It's going to be $100 million from Google minus whatever administrative costs are involved with that, minus whatever the value of the deals is that they currently have, which is, I think, 25 million. People are guessing something like 25 million. And so it's going to bring in a little bit of money to the industry, but nothing on the scale of what was originally envisioned, right? And the cost of it is very real because, I think people have alluded here to the idea that Facebook is a wasteland. Well, that is part of why Facebook would be a wasteland, if in fact it was, right? Because they felt that they had no choice. If you want to see less of something, you tax it, and C18 brought you less of things for
Ms.
that
Gardner.
reason.
Thank you very much. I now go to, for the Liberals, Patricia Latanzio. Ms. Latanzio, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mes premières questions vont être adressées à Madame.
My first questions will be for Ms. Brun. First of all, Ms. Brun, thank you for having made your presentation. I was wondering, you were talking about your report from 2023 entitled Digital News Report Survey, a survey. So, first of all, could you share that with the committee? And secondly, could you present a few of your conclusions? Well, I did that in my presentation. I don't have it before me. There's a lot of data in this. It's a survey we conduct every year with the Writers' Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University. And it shows us year after year the decline in confidence in the media, as your colleague was saying earlier, and the interest. It was really the issue of interest in the news that had declined. That was the exchange Ms. Gardner had with Mr. Waugh earlier. People are turning away from the news. It's not so much that people are going elsewhere to find news, but they're just checking out completely. There's not really any new sorts that replaces traditional media. Last year, what we saw in 2022 was, not just in Canada, in fact, but in many countries, an increase in actively avoiding the news. Of course, we're overwhelmed. There's too much. It's overload. 2022 was a very difficult news year with the end of the pandemic. We were fed up. There was the war in Ukraine. People were turning away from the news. That's what I tried to say in my presentation. That is the most important issue. And why? There are practices that are interesting in terms of bringing people back to the news. Of course, there's local news, news that proposes solutions. The most productive journalism forms are forms that are complex to put in place. People like scientific news. They like explainers, explanatory reports where you learn new things and you're not just talking about politicians who are yelling at each other, with all due respect. Things that help us understand the world we live in and think of solutions together, and things that affect people in their daily lives. So there are things that lead us to hope. There are formats that seem to work very well. So we have to continue to explore those things. Your organization works primarily with Quebec organizations. What are the challenges of Quebec media? Are they different from those of the national media? And if so, how? Quebec media were protected from the crisis for a long time because of the size of the market. And there's a language barrier, there's a set of programs, there's a cultural identity, but we're seeing this change. People use big streaming platforms, not just for information, of course, but media in general. They turn to other sources or turn away from traditional sources. We see this in Quebec. We see the fact that trust is declining in Quebec, even though traditionally it's higher, at least among francophones. So there are particular challenges, but I'm a Quebecer by adoption. I'm an Acadian as well as a Franco-Manitoban in my youth. So I think that Quebec has a lot of resources and creativity to get out of this crisis. I'm perhaps more worried about other regions of the country where indeed there is less. We have a provincial government that invests a lot in these things, but that's not necessarily the case in all provinces. I'm not saying that everything's fine in Quebec. That's not what I mean at all. Thank you, Ms. Brun.
Seconds left to my colleague.
Mr. Nur Mohammed, well, you can do it in 2 seconds, but I'm going to cut you off in 2 seconds.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. With the time left, I would like to table the motion that I had circulated to all in this committee that's been circulated by the clerk. And I would like to be able to now read that motion. However, it has been circulated by the clerk to all, and it has been tabled, it has been presented already.
Yes, I understand it has been circulated, so would you like to read it for the record?
If you'll permit me, I would do that. Yes, Madam
Go
Chair.
ahead.
Okay, the motion reads as follows. I just closed my screen. Lovely. Once I just closed my screen. What just happened here? Cancel. Come on. All right, everyone's going. This is what happens when you use technology. Okay, notice of motion. There we go. Where did it go?
I have one here, Mr.
Thank you. It was not, regrettably not printed. I have it here in electronic form. I will read it now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Given announced plans to lay off 4,800 employees, Bell Canada Enterprises' largest such set of layoffs in nearly 30 years, directly impacting a minimum of 4,800 families across Canada and significantly harming access to Canada to local journalism and thus significantly damaging the democratic discourse, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee called on the executive leadership of Bell Canada Enterprises, BCE, to testify for a minimum of 2 hours to discuss the announced cuts. The meeting should take place no later than March 1st, 2024, and witnesses called are Mirko Bibic, President and CEO, BCE Inc. and Bell Canada, Sean Cohen, President, Bell Media, Blake Kirkby, Group President, Consumer and Small and Medium Business, Curtis Mullen, Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, BCE and Bell Canada, Corinne Moses, Senior Vice President, Content Development and News and Vice Chair, Quebec, and Nikki Moffat, Executive Vice President, Corporate Services and Chief Human Resources Officer.
Thank you. You all have the, so Ms. Ashton, and then Martin.
Yes, we support this motion. I would also like to propose an amendment to the motion.
Go ahead.
Okay, I think it's also been circulated, and so our amendment would be: the committee also calls on the Minister of Heritage and the Minister of Industry for 1 hour each to explain their response to these devastating job cuts that will affect thousands of workers, the fight against disinformation, and access to local news for communities across the country.
Thank you. Now, we will discuss the amendment, please. Martin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Moi, l'amendement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I disagree with the amendment. It has nothing to do with Bell. If we want to do a study of everything that led to these cutbacks, that's one thing, but we'll need more than one meeting. We seem to want one meeting to have the top brass at Bell. We'll have a lot of people from Montreal, Toronto. We can talk about the impact this will have in the regions. If we invite the minister as well, we won't see the end of that meeting. So if the NDP wants to propose that we ask the minister to appear on this subject, no problem. We can discuss it in a separate motion. But one meeting to meet all the Bell people to get explanations, I don't think we have any room to ask to meet with the minister. Thank you.
The amendment. Any further discussion, Talib?
First, I'd like to echo what Mr. Champoux said. I mean, the purpose of this motion that we put forward was to be nonpartisan, to be clear, to be concise, to remove the politics out of this and put Bell on the hot seat. Like Mr. Champoux says, I'm not sure bringing the minister to answer questions that are a corporate decision is particularly helpful at this time on this particular issue.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Now I will end. Yes, Ms. Thomas?
Madam Chair.
Sure. So I guess I would just ask this. We would actually be in support of Nikki Ashton's or the NDP's change. their amendment. I haven't seen that, so I'm just wondering if that has been
No, I
circulated.
haven't seen it either. But she read it out, so.
Oh, okay, she said she sent it to the P9?
When it was moved.
All right, and so you're sending it to everybody now? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so, yes, go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I would just ask that before we go to a vote, the Liberals often ask if they can have a couple of minutes to confirm. I would just ask for the same courtesy.
Thank you. We're going to suspend
Rappel au règlement avant,
for
Madame
a
la
few
Présidente.
minutes.
Point of order, please. Quite clearly, I don't think we'll have time for another round of questions. It might be courteous to thank the witnesses for having been so generous with their time with us today and let them go and continue the discussion on the motion.
A while. So I would like to thank the witnesses for coming. I'm sorry that your testimony was kind of cut short a bit, but thank you very much for coming. So you may leave anytime you like. Thank you. And we suspend. Ms. Thomas, you had the floor, asking for suspension.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm okay with proceeding.
You're
to the
good?
vote. Yes.
All
thank
right, so do you wish us, is there any further discussion? Do you wish me to call the vote on the amendment? I will. Go ahead, please, clerk.
The vote is on the amendment of Ms. Ashton. Ms. Dillon.
Ms. Dillon.
Nay.
Nay.
Ms. Gainey.
No.
Madame Latanzio.
No.
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
No.
Mr. Koto.
No.
Mr. Wall.
Yes.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes.
Monsieur Gould.
Oui.
Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Monsieur Champoux.
Non.
Ms. Ashton.
Yes.
So 5 yeas, 5 pour, nays contre, 6.
Well, the amendment does not carry. We shall move now to the motion as unamended. Let's vote on that, or is there any further discussion to the motion? Yes, Martin?
J'ai une préoccupation par rapport à...
I have a concern about the motion. The study we have right now before us, what is it again that we have to complete before the end of February? Last time we discussed the calendar with the committee, February 29th was supposed to be a meeting about training for the members of the committee. And the Liberal motion says that we have to have this meeting with Bell before March 1st. So I'd like to get some clarification from the clerk, please, to see whether this is in fact the case.
Martin, what would happen is that we, if you recall, we were going to study your media study for 4 meetings. You cut one out, so it's only 3, so that may buy us that time so we don't change the whole thing, except maybe to get that be the extra meeting if everyone is in agreement.
He is correct. The 29th was reserved for...
Yes, I know,
Yep, so
I know,
he's correct.
I know. So that would be the change, basically.
Donc, pour être clair, la réunion...
Okay, so to be clear, the meeting with Bell would be on February 29th to respect the motion.
Merci.
And it gives the clerk time to call the witnesses in, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so I shall call the vote on the motion as presented. Go ahead.
The vote is on the motion of Mr. Noor Mohammed. Madame Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Gainey.
Oui.
Madame Latanzio.
Oui.
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yes.
Mr. Koto.
Oui.
Mr. Wall.
Abstain.
Ms. Thomas.
Abstain.
Monsieur Gould.
Je m'abstiens.
Mr. Shields.
Abstain.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Ms. Ashton.
Yes.
So 7 yeas, 7 pour.
And so the motion carries, and we will be bringing that meeting, that 2 hours, on February the 29th. Okay, so now the witnesses have left, and there being nothing further to pardon?
Travel.
Oh, sorry. We have one thing to bring to you. We have 10 minutes left, guys. The one thing we're bringing is the clerk was going to bring us back a travel itinerary with costs attached to it. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we need you to say yea or nay because it has to go to the liaison committee soon. And the question that I'm just going to put to you before you get to the clerk presents it is simply this. You've heard everybody saying we got to start talking to ordinary Canadians in this country. That's what this is about. Thank you. Go ahead, clerk. Have you distributed anything to us yet?
I have distributed the, it is a proposed itinerary. So the budget is not completely yet. We're still waiting for quotes, but just to give an idea to the committee members of the different locations, we did we did distribute a copy. I have hard copies for those who prefer to have the paper.
Yes, please, I'd like a hard copy. Any discussion on, you want to take time to read it quickly? I'm not going to suspend, just give you 5 minutes to read it, or 3 minutes, or 2 minutes to read it, or even 1 minute to read it.
So we have two.
The West, and one is about the East. Would be in the spring of 2024, and you have a Western travel itinerary and an Eastern travel itinerary. Have you received it yet? No? No, you're getting it?
The electronic copy was distributed.
Some of the information that you received. Go ahead, Geneviève.
So just to clarify, because there were many locations, since it is across Canada, and we were looking at non-sitting weeks, the budget was split into two, East and West. So that's why you do have two budgets, and it would be two non-consecutive weeks.
And as you can see on the itinerary, we are not only going to big cities, because one of the things we're trying to find out is people in suburban and rural areas, what do they think? What are their comments? What do they have to tell us about what's going on in their regions with regard to access to news, to culture, to, to their own, hearing their own stories and understanding what's going on in the rest of Canada. So I think, Ms. Thomas, we're going to your part of the world, proposed. Lethbridge? Yes.
So I'm sorry, just for further clarification then, the proposal on the table is that about $500,000 would be spent on traveling within Canada by this committee in order to look at diversity of Canada's culture, arts, and heritage. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what would be the hoped outcome? Or
the
desired
outcome is going to be exactly what a lot of people pointed out in this meeting today, that we don't listen to ordinary Canadians. We hear from organizations and groups and unions and industry. We don't hear from Joe Schmo in that part of the world saying this is what's going on, this is what we're thinking, this is how we're feeling. We don't think we get a piece of the action. We don't think we're getting the news. We are not getting access, blah, 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 whatever. Yes, Jacques? Oh, sorry, have you finished? No?
I'm just seeing this for the first time. So what would assure that we are hearing from ordinary Canadians during this tour?
We would hold, I would think, not a standard meeting where we bring in witnesses. We could do them. There are different ways to do these. We could have a round table where people come and like a town hall meeting, and we hear from them. People stand up and speak. They send us things. We ask them questions from the ordinary people in the room. That's one way we could do it. Another way that we've done this in the past is to invite groups and people who say they want to publicize it, and people might say, I want to come. But a more efficient way to do it is a kind of like a town hall. Sorry, Jacques? Jacques? Yeah?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm quite surprised about the cost, but today, the NDP leader announced that he may cancel the alliance with the Liberals. We may go into an election spending $500,000 and may not travel. I don't want us to buy plane tickets before this is decided. There may be elections in the spring, so I'd vote against this. Thank you.
Of the House of Commons setting up trips that exclude an act of God or an unforeseen circumstance, in which case you're not having to pay for the stuff that you've booked. So I don't know. I think that's it. We shouldn't presume anything to happen, or else we would not plan anything at all. Every other committee is bringing in their budgets for travel, etc. Let's not jump the gun on this one. Any other comment? No? Yes. Sorry, Michael. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't have the virtual hand up. All we're asking for is, are we asking them just to bring it forward and come back to us, or is this the once it goes forward, it's done, it's a done deal?
No, when it goes
work?
forward, the liaison committee, which is made up of the chairs of all the committees, decide if they want to fund it. They may say no. They said
Okay.
no to lots of budgets that come up to them. So we're just submitting something. It's not a given at all.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anything else? No. So can we ask people? To say, yes. Sorry. Sorry, Nikki. I didn't see your hand.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I don't think there's any harm in asking if there's an openness to this from the committee. I'm also on another committee, and every trip we've proposed in the last couple of years has been rejected, so I don't have much hope. I also have some concerns around the cost and, frankly, the timing as things move forward. I think expressing an interest in finding out what's going on in terms of arts and culture to those that review travel plans is not a bad thing. And if they say no, then I think we that's it. And perhaps we could look at other travel studies down the line, if in fact we're still here.
Okay, I think the thing I wanted to say is I belong to another committee that has been rejected each time by the liaison committee. They want to travel to Africa, they want to travel to Ukraine. This is a foreign affairs committee, and have been told no each time. So this is not a guarantee that we're going to be told yes. It definitely is. It's just a submission. We're just saying we'd like to do this, and they could just come back and say no. So now, shall we call the question on sending this off to the liaison committee? Yes?
This is just a proposal, and if the committee wants to make any changes...
This is a proposal. What's the deadline for them getting back to you on maybe they don't like some of the communities we say we want to go to and want to go somewhere else? Is there any change to the proposals? Yes, yes.
Madam Chair, I just had a question. Oops. Sorry, I just had a question in terms of this draft. Are we waiting, is my understanding that we want to submit this right away, or are we waiting for you to fine-tune the details? For example, the price, the dates, the information that's missing on these documents?
Go ahead, Jean-Pierre.
So, yes, you are correct. It's more to give you an idea of the destinations, as well as the different site visits. If you had anything that you wanted to cut, if there's anything that you absolutely want, we can adjust that. And then on Thursday, we would bring you a detailed budget to then adopt. We are waiting for a few quotes. So some of these aren't exact, they're high-level estimates.
This is a high-level estimate, as the clerk said.
Chair, can I have a follow-up? I just have a follow-up.
Yes, go ahead.
Would it not make more sense that we obtain more information before we move on to consider the drafts? I would suggest that maybe perhaps we wait until Thursday until we get more information, and then we can make a decision, or...
We have a deadline to present. What is the deadline for the liaison?
Friday, so it needs to be adopted Thursday.
It needs to be adopted on Thursday, or not on Thursday, because we have until Friday to send all submissions to liaison.
And will we have all the information by Thursday?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Anna?
I had a similar question. I just thought perhaps we could have more time and get more information before supporting or not supporting the proposal.
Yeah.
So if we could submit feedback over email or something?
You could, I think you could let the clerk know. How do they contact you, Jean-Pierre, other than the website? How do they contact you? You've all got the clerk's email?
Yes.
If you have her email, just send it in to her about any changes. Changes in terms of venues, places we want to go to visit, or places we feel we should visit instead of the ones we have here. And the cost, remember, is a high-level estimate.
I would recommend maybe by noon tomorrow at the latest. So we can
By
get
noon
quotes.
tomorrow?
If there are any additions, we need to get quotes. Like
If there are any additions, we need to add them by noon tomorrow. Yeah.
Feedback.
Okay. All right, so there being no further discussion, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Nur Mohammed, adjourned.